and welcome to the Festival Vegan de Montréal 2021 presented by the group Christian Ventura. My name is Alexandra Bandean. I'm a vegan artist based in Montreal, and it's a pleasure for me to present you the conferences and the demos this year. The following video will be spotlighting Shauna Gray, Mandy Howard, Eric Beauteur, and Kimberly Carroll in a conference called Decolonizing, the Vegan Movement. Yes. 3 Indigenous vegans will discuss ways the vegan movement can show up more effectively for Indigenous peoples, because this is a time of great pain and grief for our social justice cousins with whom we have so many intersecting values, so it's an especially important time for us to stand beside them and support Indigenous rights. That requires understanding the core issues around Indigenous oppression, how the vegan movement has fallen down in supporting Indigenous peoples in the past, and how we can do better. So please watch the video and enjoy it.
Well, hello, folks. I'm Kimberly Carroll, and I am so happy to be taking part here in the Montreal Vegan Festival tonight. I'm a director and campaign strategist at Animal Justice. We are an organization leading the legal fight for animals in Canada. I'm also the director of Animal Justice Academy, an arm of Animal Justice. And that Animal Justice Academy is a free training program and community for animal advocates who want to be the most effective champions for animals possible. And it's my absolute pleasure to be moderating this particular panel, Decolonizing the Vegan Movement, featuring 3 phenomenal Indigenous vegans from Canada and folks that I just personally adore. Let me introduce you to Mandy Howard, Eric Beauteur, and Shauna Gray. Hello, everyone. Welcome.
Hi.
So good to have you here. And I think I also have to do another introduction because Mandy has a new member of her family. This is Alec, A-L-U-K, love it. Alec is less than a month old. And so we are just so honored to have Alec here. He's on his first panel, Mandy.
Yeah.
That's exciting. He's starting early. Wow.
Yes.
I swear this kid is going to be just an activist warrior. I can feel it in my bones.
He definitely is.
Well, it's so, you've been kind enough, all of you, to gather here this evening to share with one of your communities, the vegan and animal rights community here, how we can become better supporters of your Indigenous communities and peoples. And so we're really honored and really grateful to have you here tonight. So let me give you a little more on these fine beings. I just want to give you a little bit more background before we jump in. We're going to start with Shauna. Shauna Gray is a member of Shega-Keen Nakota Nation in Treaty 4 territory and the homeland of the Métis. She's a survivor of personal and intergenerational trauma. Shauna is a master's prepared clinical social worker with authorized practice endorsement. She's worked in the rural public mental health system for 16 years. She and her husband, Joran, have been vegan for 21 years and have 3 vegan children. Mandy, you're going to have to catch up to Shauna.
I'm trying.
Yeah. Shauna was formerly a national liaison for the Animal Save movement and is currently an organizer for Regina Pig Save, for Animal Save Movement Saskatoon, and Saskatchewan Climate Save. And obviously she's in Saskatchewan. So Shauna, so good to have you here. Thank you.
Thank you, Kim.
Okay, we're going to move on to Eric. Eric Beauteur comes from Cheguenda First Nation, a small community on the east side of Manitoulin Island. And Eric, he grew up steeped in his culture from a young age, and it was there that he gained a respect for others, the planet, and respect for all animals. He also developed a sacred relationship with food, which he still honors today. It wasn't until recent years where Eric realized he wasn't living in alignment with his values. So he made the decision to go vegan 5 years ago. And during this time, he moved to Sudbury for a year. While living there, Eric joined the Sudbury Food Policy Council to help establish food sovereignty for the city. Eric works full-time as a licensed water operator for the region of Peel and Caledon and now lives in Toronto. And Eric is also a board member with the Toronto Vegetarian Food Bank. And we love having Eric. Eric, I guess I didn't say in the introduction, I'm also a director at the Toronto Vegetarian Food Bank. So yes, TVFB, go. Welcome, Eric. Last but not least, I already introduced Alec in all his glory, but Alec's mother is Mandy Howard. And Mandy describes herself as two-spirit, sovereignty speaker, animal and Indigenous rights activist. She's been an emergency room nurse and is an Indigenous full-spectrum doula, and she runs her own animal rescue. So usually in Mandy's arms, there's little kittens. This is a little different. You can often see Mandy drumming and singing at Indigenous and animal rights events to advocate for the planet, the land, the water, the peoples, and the animals. So Mandy, welcome. So good to have you here. And so when you're in the thick of new motherhood.
It's my pleasure.
Okay, well, I want to jump in, folks. I know that we have a lot of people joining us here at the Montreal Vegan Festival that are really curious about this topic. They were really excited about it. And so I just want to start with a little bit of background. And actually, I think I know Eric's story, but I might know a bit about Mandy's, but I actually don't know the details of how you came to veganism and animal rights. So really, I'm looking for your vegan origin story. I know, but I think it's especially interesting to hear it from you folks. So, Shauna, let's start with you. Tell us a little bit about how you came upon veganism and animal rights.
Well, it's actually kind of a boring story. I think a lot of people have really exciting stories, but interesting, moving stories. But for me, it was just in a period of my life where I was kind of questioning everything, and I was exploring a lot of different ways of thinking and ideas. And one thing that was really important to me at that time was health and fitness. And I came across a vegan plant-based diet as the optimal diet for human beings. And it kind of planted a seed, I guess, with me in the sense that I had an aha moment of I never had to eat animals to live. And I think I grew up believing that I did. And so I had, like all of us, I had reasons that I felt that I had to take the lives of animals. And then I learned that I didn't have those reasons. And a whole bunch of things started to kind of peel apart after that, I think, layer by layer. It took about 2 years for me to fully get to the point of like challenging all these different layers, like from the spiritual practices that were attached to just the simple basics of like traditional foods that we ate, like not even Indigenous traditional foods, but I mean like turkey at Thanksgiving kind of foods, and just like learning a new way of living. And then in January of 2000, we just became vegan. That was that.
Amazing. And raising 3 vegan kids as well. Yeah, amazing. Thank you, Shauna.
Yeah.
Eric, tell us a little bit about how it happened for you.
Yeah, so for my vegan origin story, it's actually 6 years now, this past October. So it's been 6 years since I made the decision to go to a vegan lifestyle. So it was kind of similar to Shauna's story. Like I originally, I don't know where I came across it, and like being from Manitoulin, and there isn't much exposure to veganism. And I came across it one day, how healthy and how beneficial it is, like for myself, for the planet, animals, like everything and everyone benefits from it. There's not one thing that doesn't benefit in some way from veganism. So I was like, this is something I want to do. And I guess I also had like some other instances around food, which kind of like made me realize like I shouldn't be consuming animal products. Like I had like drank some milk one time and it was like really sour, and I was like, I don't want to be drinking cow's milk. We're not meant to be drinking cow's milk. So I was like, I'm done with that. And have had other instances, like for example, like I was eating like a frozen chicken burger one time, and like I don't know what made me think of it at the moment, but all of a sudden I had these realizations like this isn't actually real food, and like I'm ingesting this like processed meat, and like it's not food, like, and I shouldn't be eating this. And so I made the switch for health and fitness reasons to begin with. And then, I used to be like extremely overweight and like didn't like my self-image. And like I used to weigh like, believe it or not, I used to weigh like 280 pounds, but switching to veganism and exercising, like I lost like 80 pounds. And it was really beneficial and positive switch for me. And I realized I wasn't in alignment with my values. And coming from where I came from, I grew up attending a lot of traditional ceremonies, and in those ceremonies, we respect the animals, and we don't just factory farm them. And then, it's not what was alignment with how I grew up. So I realized I had to get back to where I was, and that's why I chose veganism.
Wow. You know what? I knew some of that story, but I did not know the 280 pounds, Eric. You're just like this tall, skinny guy to me now. Like,
and like one other thing I just want to add, like, I know it's hard like for people who want to switch to veganism, and like I didn't really know what I was doing. Now it's like nothing for me. But like one of my first meals as vegan was a kimchi sandwich on like whole wheat bread. Like it was just straight kimchi on like 2 slices of whole wheat bread, and that's all I had for dinner.
Oh man, I'm glad you got some help.
Yeah.
Thank you, Eric. Mandy, how about you? I know it's a deep, sort of a bit of an epic story for you.
It wasn't like a full aha moment for me. I was actually out with my partner at the time who had made a comment about a piece of ham that I had on my fork, that it still looked alive. And all of a sudden, the cognitive dissonance seemed to melt away. And as someone who has been in animal rescue, it really impacted me. And then, oddly enough, I was at work the next day and met with a paramedic who was also vegan. Her name is Susan Morris. She used to run Snooters. And she had told me about Pig Island that was happening in Toronto. And that weekend I went out and decided that I wanted to get to know more about veganism. And I still wasn't vegan. I had given up pork, but I wasn't vegan. But it was there for me. And the first truck that stopped, it's really hard for me because it's really linked to a lot of like childhood trauma.
Yeah.
But like seeing them was like looking in a mirror at my like little girl self, who was being abused, and like people turned a blind eye at knowing what was happening, but still no one said anything. And it was the first time I ever saw someone look back at me as me, like, and from that moment I knew like there was no way I could do that to another person. I was a commodity for a really long time and objectified, and I couldn't continue living my life that way. And that night I went home and vowed that never again would someone else suffer at my hands. So it's been 13 years. So
amazing. Oh, Mandy, thank you. And thank you. You just always bring it. You just bring it emotionally. Thank you for just opening it up for us, right? Like there's no holding back tonight. We're just gonna let things flow. So thank you, Mandy. I love you for that.
I love you.
Okay. So that was fascinating. And thank you for indulging me. I really did learn some new things there. So, I would just sort of want to address, right off the top too. It's just been such a a year of both pain and awakening around Indigenous issues. Of course, the residential school unmarked burial sites was, really kicked it all off. We had the first National Day of for Truth and Reconciliation, or the Orange Shirt Day, and we've had the Fairy Creek protests and the appointment of an Indigenous Governor General. I mean, so many things. Some genuine waking up and some lip service. How has the journey through this year been for you and your communities? And you don't need to talk about all of it. You can just talk about a particular part if you'd like. But Eric, let's start with you this time.
All right. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. The past year has been rough, and when the news first came out about the first hidden or unmarked grave, I didn't know how to process it, and like I'm still processing it and healing from it, and it was so sudden. Like I was numb to it, and like I wasn't even aware of it until like one of my family members had brought it up, and like I still wasn't like processing it, and then all of a sudden like it just hit me like a wave, and like someone had reached out, like in my close circle had reached out and asked how I was doing, and then I realized I hadn't even checked in with myself about how I felt about it, and then I started to like process and like realize where I stand on it, and it's challenging because I feel like I do want to talk about it, but I also don't want to talk about it because it also, any time I think about it or talk about it, it opens those wounds again, and then I feel like also it is part of Indigenous people and First Nations part to talk about it, but it's also on the ends of non-Indigenous folks to talk about it because it's also their history. It's not only Indigenous person's history. It's Canada's history as a whole. And so, yeah, I'm still processing and healing.
Yeah, that's got to be hard because, I mean, this is the time that these issues do need to be brought out for non-Indigenous, people to be able to start to really understand. I mean, we've been a very ignorant nation generally, and yet you're holding your own pain. You're dealing with your own, intergenerational trauma. So, I can imagine that's just been so much to carry. Yeah. Mandy, how has it been for you?
I think I found it particularly difficult, carrying life. I'm so privileged knowing that like no one is ever going to take him from me. But like that privilege also shows me just how absolutely heartbreaking and heart-wrenching it was for like our ancestors, watching their babies being taken away, and the amount of loss is so enormous. I feel like settlers have no idea just how enormous the loss of our children is, and because what came with it was the loss of everything: our culture, our language, our ancestors, our ways of life, our coping mechanisms. Because in lieu of being able to have ceremony, we were introduced to alcohol, and alcoholism became a really big coping mechanism in our communities that we've been stigmatized for. Having the, Indigenous Governor General is also a huge slap in the face. It's like using our own people to once again, police us in our bodies. There's nothing radical about it. It's a big PR, thing for the government to look progressive. And for us, it just feels, it's devastating to have one of your own just further inflict injury upon your communities, upon the land. It's been a very spiritual incredibly difficult year. Just watching everything unfold, watching people still deny what's happened to us, to use it in ways to hurt us, to laugh about it, to further their racist views. It's tough. It's I don't even have words anymore.
Mm-hmm. I'm sure it's just been a bloody exhausting year.
Yeah.
And then you're also producing human in the middle of that. Yeah. Thank you, Mandy. Shauna, how about you? Tell us a little bit about this past year for you.
I think a lot, like Eric said, when the news first came out about the unmarked graves, I felt a sense of being numb. I think partly it was because for most Indigenous people, I think for all Indigenous people, it was no surprise that there's unmarked graves at these sites. We knew that our ancestors and our relatives were missing. These are not revelations to us as a community. It's really special to us that we found them and we can honor them now in a way that we couldn't when they were just lost to us. But we knew, and we know there's so many more. So then when the first unmarked graves were found, it opened up a very large well of grief because we know there's thousands. And that's been shown to be true already, just in how much they've found so far. So I started off feeling kind of numb, I guess, kind of that cynical mind of not really thinking that people would see, because there's been so much telling of what's been happening for so long. You know, we've been talking about our experiences in residential schools very publicly for a long time, and we haven't had the kind of awakening, I guess, that this brought for people. And then once it really hit me, the grief was so much that my body couldn't contain it. It was just overwhelming. Luckily, I was connecting, I think, with others, you guys, and others around, that I could kind of talk it through. But it's exactly like Mandy said. There's not even words to be able to express what this is. And in terms of our own communities, with COVID lockdowns and everything else happening, it was really hard to be connected and to properly process it from like a spiritual practices or community connectedness way. So that was really tough. It was, I don't know, it's not over, and it's still happening, and we're still figuring out exactly what it feels like. I mean, the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, I have such mixed feelings about it. I think at my workplace, getting an email telling me it was a statutory holiday with no sort of context for why, it just feels empty. Mm-hmm. Obviously, the actions of our prime minister made it feel, I don't even know what the words are for that, like a slap in the face, I guess, like Mandy said. Like it was just like so much disrespect. That was so inappropriate. That was not okay. And I think, again, yeah, just like Mandy said, that the colonialism that's still being perpetrated against us, even in offering us a national holiday and having an Indigenous governor general, that's not the solution. That's not the way through. Decolonizing is the way through. And decolonizing is hard work, and it requires listening to us, not imposing more systems that are the same on us. Yeah, I don't know. I have a lot more I could say, I think, around like, I had the opportunity to go to Kamloops. I saw the memorial they have set up there. I felt the energy of that place, of the sorrow there. I had the opportunity to go to Fairy Creek. I saw the devastation there, that violence being perpetrated against Indigenous people by the national police force, and then came back home to a national Day of Truth and Reconciliation, the first kind of major event in the community that I live in, which is not an Indigenous community that I live in. The march through town that they did, which I'm really proud of them for doing, was led by the RCMP. It was, and part with it, and there was a drumming group, and as they were drumming, the RCMP put their sirens on repeatedly through this march. It's, the connections are not being made, and I don't know how we can make it more clear what's been perpetrated against us than for the most vulnerable people to be discovered, treated like garbage.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Shauna. Well, and I mean, so many layers, so far to go, but we can at least start to focus here right now on decolonizing the vegan movement. And so I think it's important to, for the folks that have joined us this evening to understand, some of the aspects of the vegan movement that particularly need decolonizing. So I just invite you to share, some of the things that you've seen the vegan movement or groups or individuals getting wrong around Indigenous folks and Indigenous issues. And Mandy, we'll start with you for this one.
I think one of the basic things that is always an issue, and I try to speak out about to the vegan community here in Toronto, is that we don't kill animals to make our drums. That's not how it works. We don't kill animals to wear them. That's not how it works. Any life that has ever been taken by our communities is for sustenance, and the reason we have drums and furs were to keep us warm and to keep the spirit of that animal alive. It's reborn because of the respect that we have for the life that was given to sustain our people. It's not done so that we can have more drums or we can have fancier regalia or anything like that. I've often heard that, we just hunt to make more drums. Drums are gifted, they're earned, they're not something that we just make en masse. Protesting at our ceremonies is a really difficult one.
And that's
speaking
happened?
It's happened many times. Having different movements come in and just making assumptions about who we are as a people, making it very pan-Indigenous as well, like as though every nation performs ceremonies the same way, uses animals rather than has a relationship with them. There's just a lot of bias in white Western veganism that does not fit in our communities or the way that we've ever learned to live in the world, with the land, with the water, with our non-kin, our non-animal. Wow, I have mom brain. Our our non-human animal kin, like they are our first family, and we have such amazing and different relations with them. And I feel like the biggest issue is that no one wants to listen, because there's a very much a righteousness to colonial veganism.
Thank you, Mandy. Shauna, how about you? What are some places where you really think there's some decolonizing that needs to happen?
Yeah, I think Mandy just really hit the nail on the head there when she talks about that righteousness, that sense of speaking from a place of knowing or knowing better, and assuming that Indigenous people don't know or don't know better. I think we've in previous panels when we've talked before. Oh, my dogs are barking.
That's all right. We're all welcome. All our relations, right?
We've talked about the importance of listening, of actually listening, like stopping to listen and hear what's being said. Not just preparing your next argument in your mind of how to counter whatever the Indigenous person is saying to you to so-called defend their practices. I think that that's the challenge of veganism, is that of course we want people to come to our side, I guess, and see things from our perspective, but then we're not willing to consider other perspectives. Of course, it comes from a place of wanting to help and protect animals, but the thing is, and I think this is the biggest gap, is that Indigenous people also want to protect animals, right? It's just that the worldview is significantly different. There's another way of knowing that sees those, like Mandy said, those interrelationships, those relationships with animals in a totally different way than what we're used to seeing animals in like the Western worldview or the colonial worldview, where they're seen as a commodity, they're seen as something that we use. I mean, even people who have so-called pets still see that sort of relationship of ownership sometimes, where I think Indigenous people acknowledge that these little beings are their own sentient individuals, you know, like oftentimes it's a different type of relationship with pets. Maybe I'm taking that a little bit too far, but I think, and the other piece, like Mandy said already, is to think of all animal use, I guess, in the kind of colonial worldview mindset is seen as cruel. And I think that there's some deconstructing that needs to happen there too, in terms of where that comes from. And I think certainly in the Western world that there's truth in that. It's materialistic, like Mandy was describing. It's about what that animal can provide to you, what they can do for you, what their purpose is, right? And I think that's sure. Indigenous people also think of the purpose of animals, but it's not for us. That's how I would generalize it.
Shauna, so knowing that I've gone through this journey, so I know what the steps are of the settler mindset. When people hear you say that, they might go, well, nothing culturally should ever should give permission to kill animals. And so what is, do you say around something like that?
I think it's tough. That's a tough one. What I would say is it is a different worldview, and that's true. I'm not saying that to defend eating turkey at Thanksgiving, like I said earlier. I'm saying that the relationship that we have with animals is different because of the spirituality that we come from. And again, I don't mean to make statements in some sort of pan-Indian way here, but I think it's generalizable across a lot of Indigenous culture. And in our culture, it's not just animals that are seen as sentient and having spirit. Plants are seen as sentient and having spirit. Mountains are seen as sentient and having spirit. Water is seen as sentient and having spirit. So I think that it's completely different to look at the world as if you're a part of it, because we are. And the animals need us, we need the animals, because we're all part of the same thing. And I think that when we're making these kind of generalizations, like, oh, you can't use culture to justify, we're talking about cruelty. And again, not all of these relationships are about cruelty. And I'm not saying all Indigenous people are only engaging in culturally significant relations with animals. Of course, there's a lot of colonialism within our communities as well. I know later we're going to talk about some of the foods we've veganized that are indigenous, and so many of those are colonial foods when I think of them, right? Like wiener water soup or something like that is like something we all talk about because it's part of our lived experience, but it's certainly not part of our cultural history.
So Shauna, just so I correct me if I'm wrong, but even if we, don't believe that killing there's a justification for killing animals, just to assume that, people are ignorant or, savage because they're doing it is just absolutely the wrong, like that we need to listen and we need to know the context and we need to know, where all of these ideas, beliefs, practices root from, or we can't have a good sort of respectful, even, conversation about it.
I think just listen, and be respectful. I mean, you might not come to a place of agreement, but that doesn't mean that Indigenous person isn't going to stand alongside you to fight for clean water where there's a pig barn going up, right? I mean, absolutely. We have so many overlapping and intersecting reasons to stand together. We don't have to fix or fight or come to agreement over every single thing to be effective in collaborating for a better planet and a place for these animals to live.
Love that. Thank you, Shauna. And Eric, what about you? What is a place where you, a particular place in the vegan or animal rights movement where you really think there's some decolonizing that needs to happen?
I feel like Shauna and Manny, they nailed it. They covered
they covered it. Well, let me go on to the next one then, okay? Eric, and we'll start with you. We started to talk a little bit about this, and I this is a piece that I just find so rich and fascinating. I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you've seen animals regarded traditionally in your cultures. So, what role animals play, and even if, you can give sort of some anecdotes or examples of that, that would be wonderful. So Eric, how have you seen animals and the animal relationship with your people?
So growing up, I've attended quite a few ceremonies, and in those ceremonies, there's a lot of animal, parts of animals, like the drum has deer skin, and we have different rattles or shakers, which there'll be turtles, and these turtles aren't killed for their shells. They're either found already, and we use what the turtle has gifted us. The turtle didn't just I'm going to give. No, we found the shell. We didn't go out and smash the turtle to take their shell. A lot of the stuff that we find, including eagle feathers and different stuff that we have in our ceremony and for our regalia, we're not going out specifically pillaging the land and the animals to take their gifts from them. No.
Canada Goose.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We give the gifts willingly, and we accept them, and we're aware of that relationship and the balance between the animals. And so we honor them in the ceremony and outside of ceremony when we have our drums or if we have our regalia. And so I've become aware of that relationship at a young age, and also that animals have personhood, and we recognize that from Manny Shauna touched on earlier about when people have pets and they think they have ownership over the pet, no matter what pet it is, fish, dog, cat, gerbil, rabbit. They think there's some sort of they think they're above the animal, and really the animals, we're on the same level. There is no hierarchy or superiority in the animal kingdom as much as humans think they are on top or not.
It's a circle of life as opposed to a hierarchy. Yeah,
totally. And so it goes back to having animals as pets, and I hear it all the time, and it's something I learned through the Animal Justice Academy. when you're referring to animals, especially your pet, you don't refer to them as it. It's not an it. They have a name. They have feelings and wants just like any other person or being.
Absolutely. Thank you, Eric. And Mandy, you know, I remember I heard this, it might have been from Senator Murray Sinclair, but I think and it was probably just drawing on a teaching, but talking about how, you know, often in Western culture, we think of ourselves as the stewards of animals, and that it's not us taking care of the animals, but it's the animals taking care of the humans. So tell us a little bit about how you've seen sort of animals be placed in and interacted with in your culture.
The animals are our first caregivers when, you know, we were a gift to them from Creator. They're not a gift to us. There's a reason why we have clan systems. You know, I've been lovingly adopted into the bear clan, and I take my child into that clan with me. Through different ceremonies that I have been allowed to be, you know, present in and gifted you know, the honor of being part of witnessing. I've met a lot of different folks from a lot of different nations from around all of Turtle Island. And, you know, the one thing that made my heart burst that we all have in common is that through our travels around different places, you know, coming together in ceremony, you hear a lot of folks talking about, you know, different animals that they've witnessed have died along the roadside. And they talk about that animal and putting down sema, which is our sacred tobacco, you know, saying a prayer for that animal. Or even, you know, putting sema outside their windows in the car because they're driving by someone who's been hit. And it's just like this love and respect for a life that was taken, especially taken like by us humans in a way that was not in any way respecting the animal or for sustenance or for any reason other than the fact that a human was driving a car and hit that animal. It's now taken a life and didn't even respect it enough to bury the animal, didn't respect it enough to maybe take some quills off of a porcupine to rebirth it as, you know, part of regalia or anything like that. It's been such a universal story that I've heard people like talking about in their travels to come together for ceremony. And I thought that I was the only person who did that, because I'm pretty notorious in Toronto for stopping and moving everyone off the road or taking them somewhere. I can't leave anyone to die alone. It bothers me. So that was someone. And to know that so many different nations and so many people that I don't personally know, that I've just met through gathering, having ceremony, that they also do that. I don't know. It really rings so true. Like the love that we actually have and the relationship that we have with animals that people forget when they think about like Indigenous folks.
Thank you. Shauna, how about you? What would you like to share about how animals are regarded traditionally in Indigenous cultures?
So I kind of touched on it, I think, already in something I said previously, but certainly in Nakota culture, one of the most important animals, as I think most people know, is the bison. And from our perspective as Nakota people, we're inseparable from the bison. We are the bison and the bison are us. Their fate is tied with ours. Probably you know, in the colonial history, that the slaughter of bison was actually a method used by the government to control Indigenous people. to try to force them onto reserves. This is something that happened in the Plains and certainly happened directly to my ancestors, including my own great-grandfather. He has spent a winter where they actually had no food and ended up eating their horses because there was nothing for them to eat in the way that they knew to interact with the land. And ultimately they did end up choosing to go to reserve, or choosing, that's the wrong word, being forced onto reserve. And shortly thereafter, actually, my grandfather was taken to residential school, so my great-grandfather. So all of this is tied in with our lived history pre-colonialism and after contact as well. And I think that we're working really hard to restore the right relations now with bison. You've probably heard some stories of bison populations being returned to traditional lands or sacred spaces. And yet, when I read the stories, there's always some aspect of that colonial relationship, some aspect of the economy, or some aspect of tourism, or some aspect in there to make it so that it actually feels palatable, I guess, to the mainstream reader. I don't know. But really, for Indigenous people, it's just about having our kin back on the land that they belong with. You know, we were given the instructions by the Creator of how to live on this land, and bison are a part of that. So not having them here has made it so that we can't be who we are in this place.
Mm-hmm. So thank you, Shauna. So I want to, sort of while we're on this topic, I've said this to you before, that, my generation got next to no education around Indigenous history in school. And when I finally sort of started, very late doing my own research and educating myself, I mean, I was positively embarrassed, ashamed of what I didn't know, of how ignorant I was. And I'm still have so much to learn. So, and I believe from what, just talking to people I know, people, in different circles, Canadians are generally clueless about Indigenous issues and history. So for those who are just beginning this journey of educating themselves, what are some of the important points about Indigenous issues that you'd really want them to know? Mandy, we'll start with you on this one. If you had 3 minutes to kind of educate people about, Indigenous issues or history, what do you think is important to get out on the table?
That we existed, that we continue to exist, that, pre-colonial time, the land wasn't dying, the earth wasn't dying. We, like Shauna said, were given instructions by the Creator that we're given, through generations, through storytelling and teachings, to teach, our youth and the youth that came after and after and after how to care for the land, so that we're going to end up where we are right now in this, post-colonial state where the earth is literally dying, where we're losing animals and different species at an alarming rate, where viruses are taking over, where we can't help ourselves because everything around us is toxic. We need that back. We need sovereignty, not because we're being greedy and want the land. We want to save the land. We want to save our mother. We want to save the water. We want to save every living, breathing, person who is on the earth right now, and make it a place where, like, my child can grow up and have children of his own, and where, it's somewhere safe. Believe our stories. Don't read academic texts. They're ableist. I don't understand half of the shit that they're telling me, and it's my history. They're dry, they're boring. Go and sit and listen to an elder about their personal story. Listen to the children about what's happening where they live. Listen to the teachings. we're way bigger allies than anyone could ever tell you. We are not against you. We don't hate the white man. We just need you to sit and listen and be our ally, to hold our hand. Don't push us away. Truly, we need to fight this together. I don't know what else to tell people. Just be my friend, not my enemy.
Beautiful, Mandy. Thank you. Shauna, what's something that you feel is needed, that people need to know?
Oh, so much so. I agree with Mandy. I know,
right?
It's so powerful. I think that the unfortunate reality of, like you mentioned, Kimberly, what you learned in school is that these were sort of almost like prehistoric cultures. You know, they were backwards and savage. That we didn't have ways of understanding the world or knowing. We didn't have science or complex cosmology. We didn't have governments. We didn't have ways to engage between nations, you know, elaborate trade routes, all of those things that hopefully people are starting to realize we did have all of this. I mean, this was a functioning place long before there was any sort of contact with European nations. And I think that's really important to know. And I don't mean it just in a get to know that there's something important from Indigenous culture. What I mean is we are still those nations. We're nations that are more ancient than the European nations. We're still passing those ways of knowing down as best we can with the damage that's been given. But because those laws, those rules, that way of knowing comes directly from Creator, we have a source of that information. So we can return to that. And we, through ceremony, we can get back to governing ourselves in a way that is aligned with how we are supposed to be here. I think that's probably the most important thing. Just to really recognize that Indigenous peoples aren't a thing of the past. This is real history. Like I said, I'm talking about when the bison were killed, my great grandfather was alive. That's a person that was like within, if I had been born just 2 years earlier, within my lifetime. You know, a lot of my cousins met him. It's a real person. It's not somebody who's like 400 years ago. This is like our real lived history, our experience of what is happening now, not something that happened so long ago you couldn't fathom it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think the other key, I just have to underline again what Mandy said and what we've said before, is to listen. Just listen. Stop trying to talk over us.
I just want to make sure you're done so I'm not talking over you. Okay. Just checking.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shauna. And, you know, I remember you talking once before about just the elaborate, complex systems that blow anything we've got today out of the water, you know, of Indigenous nations. And it really hit me quite deeply. Eric, what is something that if you had somebody who's sort of beginning on this path and you had their undivided attention for a few minutes, what would you want them to know?
Well, I'm going to start by saying, like, what Shauna was alluding to, and Mandy as well, like, we had sophisticated systems in place and ways of being which, like, sustained everyone, including the animals, including ourselves and the plants. And it was in a, like, it was just, they nailed it. And so, like, the history of Indigenous people is so rich with, like, ways of being that it surpasses of, I'm not saying that we're better, I'm not trying to say that we're better, but like there's a lot of like knowledge and like history in Indigenous culture, which is like, we need to like get back to that. Like it's going to be beneficial for the planet and everyone on the planet. Just for me, one personal thing I would like to share is like a Indigenous issue, and I don't know if many people in Canada are aware of it, but drinking water on Indigenous First Nations. Me being in the field I am, I work in the water field, and it's why I got into the water field. Currently, like there's 13.5% of First Nations that are under boil water advisory in Canada, and in Ontario alone, is 40% of all our First Nations have drinking water, boil water advisories in effect at this time. And if these were municipalities or like townships that had these issues, they would be in the news day in, day out. But there's nothing being done on these fronts. And as much as like the government says they're doing work towards it, we're almost nearly half of the First Nations in Ontario are suffering without clean drinking water, and people don't realize like there's lots of First Nation folks who don't have access to that right now.
Mm-hmm. And I just would like to throw in that, you know, the continuation of the work of the residential school system in our current, you know, social services, section. I'm not sure if anybody can jump in with the percentage. I think it's 40% of all children in federal care or provincial care are Indigenous children, and Indigenous peoples make up 7% of the population, I believe. So anyway, I just wanted to throw that in there because I feel like it's an important piece for people to understand. So let's go back to the animal rights movement specifically, and let's dissect a really tangible example of how our movement has gone wrong with, you know, Indigenous folks. And that's when a group in Toronto in 2017 protested an Indigenous owned restaurant because it was serving seal meat. Now, you know, I know most of you don't believe in the commercial, you know, seal hunt, but there are still a lot of people that don't understand why this protest was considered racist and anti-Indigenous by Indigenous folks especially, but really anybody sort of in the know. So does anybody want to, you know, give that a stab and explain that a little further? Shauna, do you have anything that you could give us some enlightenment on?
Yeah, I think we've talked a lot about some of the reasons that in Indigenous culture, the way we view animals is different. But I think that ultimately we're talking about a group of people, Indigenous people, who are coming back from a period of extreme oppression in society, whose cultural practices were suppressed and did not, like, taken away from us, right? I mean, it was illegal for me to for my ancestors to practice parts of their culture until very recently. So I think it's definitely the wrong place to start, to go to an oppressed group who are coming back to cultural practices and say, it's not okay for you to practice that. I mean, it is exactly what already happened to us. It's re-traumatizing us. It's another colonial approach to this kind of a conversation, to say, you know, and I wasn't at that protest, obviously. I'm not in Toronto, but I honestly can't imagine what that must have felt like for Indigenous people to be on the receiving end of that, knowing what that legacy of trauma feels like to live with on a daily basis. There's having people shouting against you when you're trying to live authentically. It would be devastating.
Well, especially when there's millions, possibly billions of privileged white people who are eating meat daily. You know, like, hello.
Yeah. There's a lot lower hanging fruit. No kidding.
Yeah, exactly. I'm just like, I'm sorry, but until every single non-Indigenous person in the world is not eating meat, I'm not touching any Indigenous issues. That's just, my take on it.
Yeah.
So, anybody want to add anything to this? Shauna, I while we're on this topic, you said something last time we spoke that really hit home something for me. And because I asked, I said, sometimes, like when I have Indigenous folks on my videos, my panels, whatever, even if we're not talking about anything Indigenous, inevitably fishing and hunting comes up, even with the vegans, right? And so, and I said, can you explain a little bit more about that to me? And what you talked about with it being one of the only ways that Indigenous people have been left to prove title, to prove that the land belongs to them and it can't just be taken away.
Right. Yeah, that's, I mean, we have to prove that we have traditional use of the land, and it's pretty narrowly defined. Again, this is another colonial way of looking at what this means. I mean, we have historical relationship with this land and instructions on how to interact with it, and it's part of us. So it doesn't really make sense in colonial sort of law, I guess, but it's such a different worldview. But ultimately, to prove that, yes, in fact, we use this land traditionally, we have to be able to show that it's where we do hunting or trapping or fishing or something like that. Those are the things mostly that the government relies on. So that's become so important, I think, when we're trying to assert our sovereignty as Indigenous people, to be able to prove that we use this land. Of course, gathering too, but I think just the mindset of the colonizer is about things that are, I don't know why, it's like animal use seems to be the thing that is important, and it doesn't make sense, right? I mean, this is part of the relationship that colonial governments had with Indigenous people, was about establishing a fur trade, right? About finding ways to exploit resources such as animals. And I don't think of animals as resources, of course, but that is the perspective of the colonial government. So,
yeah, it's almost like the colonizers have kept Indigenous folks in a pattern of needing to kill animals, even just to prove that they belong on their land.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's not almost like that. It is like that.
It is like that. Yes, yeah. Exactly.
I mean, that's how we get agreements to restore populations as well. Right, is we have to prove to the colonial government or the colonial scientists that we're still, eating caribou in the north, and that they're essential to our culture. So then they'll protect some land so that caribou have a place to live. But I mean, we're changing our language to be able to engage in those discussions, because that's not what it's about for us. The caribou belong there. They're part of the land. They're part of us. Yeah.
Anybody else want to add anything to that? Okay. Well, I want to turn this around a little bit, and I want to just ask, for probably very good reasons, there's probably some pretty big stereotypes about who vegans are, that Indigenous folks might hold. Is there something you feel Indigenous folks generally get wrong about the vegan movement? And if so, what can we as vegans do to help that? Let's start, Mandy, with you.
Oh, this is a funny question.
Yeah.
Okay, so most of the Indigenous folks that, I engage with think that all vegans are white. They think that, everyone is white and privileged, and they're not wrong, because even if you don't have money, you still have white privilege. I'm white passing, so I hold that privilege. So give it to me. That's my work, is to get out there and speak the truth for our community, because I'll be received in a different way than my darker hued kin. What else? That that vegans are all malnourished is a big one. That it's not just an Indigenous community thing. I think just all non-vegans think that, we're all on the brink of death.
That's right.
That a big one that I know a lot of communities feel is true is that vegans would rather Indigenous communities assimilate and become vegan rather than practice their own traditional ceremonies and live on their own in their own territories on the land the way that we've been told to live with creation. I know a lot of white allies who don't want that, but unfortunately I have heard, like, why don't they just move to the city? Why don't they just do this? Why don't they just do that? We don't want to assimilate. We're kind of tired of being told to assimilate. It's kind of like me telling every settler to go back to their own country, which would not be received very kindly by folks, and it's the same thing.
And how can we help? So in what ways, for those that are watching tonight, I mean, what are some of the ways that our movement needs to move to be able to dispel some of those stereotypes? It sounds like we've got some major growth to happen within our movement.
I think the question you literally just asked me, what can we do to help? Listen to the answer. Do your work, because we all have biases against all different types of people. We live in a society where, we have a lot of preconceived notions that have been taught to us since the moment we were born. It's our job now to decolonize our minds and listen to truths, even when they're painful. Listen to truths when they're hard to hear. Listen to them when they go against the grain, against everything you've been told. Listen to them when they go against everything you believe. Because somewhere in there, you're going to find a way to unlearn your shit. You're going to find a way to grow. You're going to find a way to realize that we have so much more in common, to build bridges with each other, that Western society is actually like putting up those barriers so that doesn't happen. Because when that happens, we are going to have a revolution. We are going to be able to fix things, and no one's going to be able to stop us. So ask that question, how can we help, rather than coming in with a plan of your own and imposing it upon communities, and knowing that for every community you walk into, they're going to all have different plans, because we all have different ways of living with the land. My folks in the East Coast have different teachings than Shauna's and Eric's. We live in different territories. We have been given a different layout from the creator of how to take care of different bodies of water, different, animal kin. We all have different plans. So don't come in with your own and tell us what we need to do and, be the white savior. Come in and ask, how can we help, after you've done that work? And if you know that you are starting to feel defensive in what folks are saying, or you're getting upset about it, then take that time to take a step back and say, like, okay, I have a bit more work to do before I can move forward in a good way that's not going to cause more violence and harm to this community or this person. Does that make sense?
Totally makes sense. Absolutely. And, just from a settler point of view, I need to say that journey is messy, and it brings up a lot of crappy feelings, and, you just have to kind of take it. You just kind of have to relax and take it in and try to go into those deeper places and listen and to know that there's people like Shauna and Mandy and Eric out there that are cheering you on for you to know, for you to understand, for you to become better and to know that that's going to it's going to require you to go through some shame. It's some guilt, but it's worth it, and it has to be done.
If you're feeling shitty, then you're doing the work. Yeah. To be honest, you're not here to pat yourself on the back and feel great about it. Growth is painful. So if you're feeling all of those feels, then congratulations, because you're doing the right work, and thank you for making it to that place, because it takes a really, really strong person to be able to sit in their own horrible guilt feelings and not try to project it back onto the communities that are the ones who actually need you to be doing that work.
Thank you, Mandy. While we're talking about this, actually, guys, I'm totally out of focus, so I'm just gonna. Okay, there I am. I'm back in focus. On this topic, considering all the intersections that the vegan movement has with Indigenous communities around animal protection, around the environment, around collective liberation, do you have other ideas on how, vegans and AR folks could adjust to be better allies and partners with Indigenous peoples? And that is even if we're wanting to work together on projects. So Mandy said, listen, okay, so does that mean listen and let them take the lead? But then that sounds like they're doing all the work. So where do we find the line of how much we step up and how much we sort of wait for direction? Any ideas there, folks?
The key to working together from an Indigenous perspective is the establishment and development of relationships. And so I think that if you're coming at it from a place of relationship and interconnectedness, it might not be that at first there is any work being done in the sense of going out on the street and doing activism. But that work of building relationships is so much more important to the overall goal. And if we don't do that work, it falls apart. I mean, we know that within the AR movement already too, that if we're not doing the work of building collective action, things fall apart because we need more people. And I think that, so it might not necessarily be even that you're listening and you're saying, what do I need to do or what do you need to do? It's just about getting to know each other, building relationship, being consistent, showing up, being reliable, and really noticing, paying attention. Like Eric was saying, some of the needs are so important. How could you even start to think about, if you don't have clean drinking water, how could you even start to go up to that next place of thinking about protesting at a slaughterhouse? I guess the recognition that Indigenous people really need more people standing with us. And I know AR does too. I'm not saying the animals' needs aren't important. I do a lot of activism for animals, but if you're thinking about that, what we're dealing with is life-threatening and threatening our nations, I think that hopefully it's clear why it's hard for us to go outside of that and offer help in other places.
Yeah, so one of the biggest ways that we can start decolonizing this movement is just by showing up for Indigenous folks, just because we believe in collective liberation. We believe that if one group is oppressed, another one is intrinsically going to be oppressed. So, I'm hoping that we've sort of got some minds and, minds going and hearts opening. What would you say are ways that folks that are watching here tonight could go forward in this journey? Are there any resources that you would recommend or people to follow for folks that want to dive deeper? Eric, is there anything that you'd sort of put people onto?
Yeah, there's quite a bit, but one that really stuck out for me, and I believe I mentioned it before. It's a book called Braiding Sweetgrass. And if you have any books that you want to like get into and dive into, I definitely recommend Braiding Sweetgrass. It's written by an Indigenous woman who actually has a lot of background in like biology, and she went to school for it, but then it kind of led her back into Indigenous ways of knowing, and like vice versa. And it's a beautiful like play on how each support each other, and like it really tells about how Indigenous people view the plants and the animals, and how there's the interconnectedness there, that it's still there no matter how much we think it's like not there anymore. It's very strong, and like it alludes to like how the interconnectedness is still at play right now.
Eric, one of the things that you've said before that had really stuck with me is just really hitting home the richness of the plant, of Indigenous folks and the use of plants as medicine. And that, that really stayed with me, like what alchemists, you're dealing with there. And that's something you've sort of seen and witnessed a little bit.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Yeah, amazing. Mandy, how about you? What would you put people onto?
I was just trying to look up on Instagram. I follow a lot of folks who are out at Fairy Creek right now. If you're on Instagram or Facebook, just look up the hashtag Fairy Creek. Look up what the Chemical Valley is. Look up Mi'kmaq lobster treaties. Just start trying to figure out how to learn more about different issues that are happening in different communities that are impacting not just the people, but also the land. When you talk about fur farms, try and look at the East Coast and see how it's like the environmental racism that's happening there with the mink farms. So it's, the land, the water is toxic. So it's killing all of the wildlife. It's killing the people who live around there. It's inhabitable.
That's so many places for collaboration, right, Mandy? Like, that's on my to-do list. You and I have to have a nice little chat about that.
It's everyone who cares about anything it kind of all falls into that pit there, that like toxic pit. And I think just instead of trying to battle the great big things, learn about the small things that are happening maybe in the communities that are close to you, and start learning about their ways of knowing and how you can support them rather than asking them to do the emotional labor. Start writing letters. Maybe if there is a protest, be on the front line as a privileged body who, if you get arrested, it's going to be
oh, we lost her. Man, there she is. There he is. Okay.
There he is.
Okay, Mandy, you were talking about putting ourselves on the front lines because for us, white settler types,
there's always like a lot of police presence whenever we have any kind of protests or gatherings in general. And, putting your body in front of ours means your arrest is going to look a lot different than what ours look like. Typically, it's a lot less violent, or you don't get arrested at all. Just actually like learning the truth about what actually happens every single day in the colonial world to Indigenous people and Indigenous communities. That's like a huge thing that you can do as an ally.
I love that suggestion, Mandy. We need to be in the front lines. We need to be armor for the Indigenous folks.
I mean, at the end of the day, we'll stand with any of you.
Yeah. Okay. I want to just a couple more questions before we wrap up, and one is, you know, I want to remind us here what the two movements, the Indigenous rights movement and the animal rights movement, vegan movement, have in common. Eric, what would you say we share?
I believe we touched on it already, but one of the biggest ones, and like both Indigenous and vegans, and Indigenous vegans like ourselves, recognize is that animals have personhood, and they're not just commodities to be exploited and used and taken for their resources. And they have feelings and wants and names, and when we refer to them as like objects, it just makes it like the veganism movement and the animal and Indigenous rights movement both recognize animals as people, and as soon as we recognize that between the communities, we would be able to work together much more effectively.
I mean, this is what animal justice is fighting for, is for animals to no longer be considered property. And this is already in your culture. It's already what what's being lived, right? So, okay, now just a fun sort of question to end us off tonight. Veganizing, I want to find out if you have a favorite Indigenous vegan dish, or if there's a traditional Indigenous dish that you veganized that you're into. Shauna, let's start with you.
Okay, so I think one of my favorite things that I've had, and I kind of alluded to this earlier, is actually a food that came from colonization. But it's the fried bannock, and there's this thing that people do with it called making Indian tacos, where they use fried bannock as the base, and then they use ground beef and cheese, just like a regular taco. So having that veganized, I had some family members who did that for me one time, and it was really incredible. So.
Oh, that's so sweet. Aw. Mandy, is there anything that you can think of that's a favorite?
Definitely dig the vegan tacos. It's all about fry bread. I actually like to use Indigenous wild rice as a so it can be used for so many different dishes, but I really love it in the morning with some oat milk and cinnamon and berries. So it's kind of a mishmash of Western and traditional culture, because traditionally we don't drink any kind of milk, but a nut milk or an oat milk, I feel like would be something that we may have incorporated along the way. So it's delicious and it's super hearty, and yeah, we like it.
And that's fueling little Alec growing up right now.
Oh, yes.
Eric, how about you? Do you have a fave dish?
Yeah, so like I'm definitely a big fan of like Indian tacos, and like I've tried a couple of renditions. Actually, I just tried like the fried bannock is like the big one, but just recently I tried it with the baked bannock. It's also a hit, by the way, if you're wondering. Try it out. Also, wild rice is another big favorite of mine as well. And I was lucky enough to like experience a traditional dish back in one of the ceremonies I attended. It's a super easy dish. Anyone can make it. You don't need fancy ingredients, and it's inherently vegan. So you have the wild rice, you cook the wild rice, you add blueberries, walnuts, and a little bit of maple syrup at the end, and you got it, wild rice casserole.
Okay, folks, next time we get together, I got to try these tacos.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So our time has sadly come to an end. I just really want to thank you, Eric and Shauna and Mandy and Alec, for sharing your love and wisdom with us here tonight. You're just, oh my God, the love and the compassion and the smarts and the just the articulate way that you all speak. You are just a blessing to both movements. So thank you. Thank you so much. And I want to thank you folks out there who are here at the Montreal Vegan Festival for joining us in this discussion. In doing so, you're honoring this as an issue that's important to you. And I think that's one of the first steps in all of this healing and all of this decolonizing that we've been talking about. So Eric, thank you. Mandy, thank you. Shauna, thank you. Alec, thank you. All right, folks, go out there and spread some love and compassion and have a wonderful rest of your evening.